there's like no news. Like, you would think if you read the news, with the exception of a few things internationally, you would think there was nothing else going on in America besides the fact that apparently we're all under Russian mind control. Putin is like a genius, and they either made half of us stay home or they made another 25% of us vote for Trump. And, you know, they invented the Bernie Bros and like all this other stuff. Like, you know, it's so wild. And Brandon, you can jump in, but like there's information that is out there, right? And allegedly there were hacks or leaks or whatever, right? And allegedly these sources go back to known Russian individuals, organizations, or whatever, right? Not that they're directly linked to the government themselves, but the fact that there are individuals or entities that have a relationship or have had a relationship, and that possibly this is something similar to Russia has done before. And why do we know they've done it before? Because we hack them and monitor them too. So all this is kind of coming together now as the case for Russia interfering in the U.S. presidential election on behalf of Donald Trump. Kind of like how Debbie Wasserman Schultz in the DNC interfered in the Democratic primary on behalf of Hillary Clinton against Bernie Sanders, right? Like, I mean, let's just be real here. If we really care about the sanctity of democracy and the sanctity of electoral proceedings, I mean, we got to go all the way back to the very beginning, because there's a whole lot of interventions going on in different places. I mean, if we're really, really concerned, like one of the questions I had today, and I don't know, Brandon, what you think about this, but one of the questions I had today was if there really was a belief that the election was hacked, not this new stuff, which really actually isn't new that the CIA is talking about, but if there really was a belief that the election was hacked, why has the Hillary Clinton campaign not requested a recount in key states? And because even in the statement joining in Jill Stein's efforts, you know, it was, you know, for the sake of, you know, integrity in the process, but we don't really think this is going to make out nothing because there's no evidence of any wrongdoing. So there's been no evidence of any wrongdoing. Nobody's talking about the broken machines that weren't reading correctly in Michigan. Nobody's talking about the fact that there were no Democratic. You know, the Green Party has limited resources, but there were no Democratic lawyers present at some of the recounts that occurred when they were trying to do them in Michigan, but there were hella Republican lawyers there. So there are all these glaring issues in this story if we really care about the sanctity of our democracy. I really think this is a bunch of bitch babies crying because Hillary Clinton didn't win. Now, if the Russian government did direct at any point the quote unquote interference in election, of course, that needs to be investigated and resolved and dealt with. But what we're seeing is this convoluting of issues, convoluting of facts with conjecture and just outright lies. There's a lot of fake news right now. Like Harry Reid is on a speaking tour and he's saying stuff with clear certainty that has not been proven, but you can't even insinuate from the information they've been provided. So I don't know. You know, I know we talked a lot about this already yesterday, but what do you think, Brandon?
Well, there's a lot to unpack with this Russian story, I guess, or maybe not so much to unpack. I don't know. I guess I'm on both sides of the fence here. The first is, what exactly is the allegation? Like you mentioned, are they saying that Russia, the government, literally hacked voting machines to give Trump the presidency? I don't think anyone's making that claim. I think at best what they're making is that someone with some affiliation,
the dim people who are running with this, and you know your Rachel Maddows and your Keith Olbermanns are saying exactly that. But go ahead.
Well, I feel like they're more hinting at that. But I think the more mainline opinion is Russia engaged in a sort of smear campaign against Hillary Clinton that was aimed at besmirching her character in front of the American people. They did this by hacking her personal campaign's accounts and releasing the information through WikiLeaks. And by releasing that information, they made people think she was untrustworthy, along with James Comey being some kind of Russian, the American sleeper agent, all of those things. But And while that's a problem, of course, these Russian hacks should be investigated, and we should definitely understand whether we're talking about Russia as a national entity or people who live in Russia, private hackers who live in Russia, who live in, who've built supercomputers in their basement and are hacking the Pentagon, and they're probably 13 or 14 releasing this information. We need to figure out what we're alleging here and stop with the warmongering. But ultimately, I don't understand what they think. I think this is all just a very convoluted way of saying, and people are saying, your Peter Dow's, your Joanne Reed's, that we need to have another election and do it again this time and do it right. And by do it right, we mean elect Hillary Clinton.
Yeah. So, this is hilarious though. And it's funny that people, there's a Mike.com video. Someone just sent me that Hillary warned us that Russians engaged in the cyber attacks that Trump was involved months ago, and no one listened to her. So here's where, and I think, we have to parse out what's going on here. We keep saying Russia interfered. I don't really understand what the interference was, right?
They released information that was private.
This is what I get that, right? Like, okay, but how is that an interference in our election? Like, what did they interfere in exactly? Because here's the thing, right? Because to interfere, to interrupt, to cause a disruption, you'd actually have to have had something going on for that to have made a difference. And when you go down through the list of issues and stuff, right, with her campaign, I mean, the people who actually took the time to even read WikiLeaks already were not voting for her. Because let's be real here, the people who stayed home in Milwaukee, they weren't sitting there going through WikiLeaks or reading Progressive Army. Like, I'm just gonna be real. I love our team of writers. Everyone, shout out to the writers. You guys are awesome. Love you dearly. But let's be real. We weren't, people who were actually digging deep into this stuff. They weren't the ones, as Stacey always says, they're not the droids that they were looking for. They decided that they were going to go after quote unquote reasonable Republicans. They decided that they were going to spend more time talking about how awful Trump was because he was a sexist, because he was a sexually aggressive person. He was allegedly a sexual predator, all that stuff, instead of talking about any damn issues. Like, I'm not going to say that that's not important, but let's be all the way real. The mainstream news, which the average American gets their news from, local news, because those people aren't watching MSNBC either, right? Those people aren't watching CNN or C-SPAN or whatever. Like, they're not covering the WikiLeaks on the regular 6 o'clock news. Like, that's just not happening. Most people were not influenced by this. And to say that, okay, go ahead.
I mean, but this is just a complete denial of reality and so yeah, I would I would say that again, when we talk about fake news, we're talking about a very small subset. It's a moral panic. People are trying to create a moral panic about a problem that, and you see this a lot with new articles and new trends on the internet that are, even with Bernie Bros. Do Bernie Bros exist? Yes, in very, very small, unorganized, largely unimportant pockets, and they're annoying and they're problematic, but there is not a concerted movement. Same with Bernie or Bust. There was no concerted Bernie or Bust movement except for in small pockets on Facebook and Reddit and blah blah blah. Is there national men's rights activism? Like, it's like, no, these are very small things going on, and fake news is another small problem being magnified. And I would even say with this issue with Russia is a small problem being magnified because of the people for whom it appeals to are the people in the mainstream media and their ilk in society, for whom the reality is there was no problem with what Hillary Clinton did. Why would she go to Wisconsin? Why would she go to Milwaukee? They're just a bunch of rednecks there. Of course she should be in New York City.
Well, I mean, it's been a blue state since 1984. So, I mean, you need to make sure it stays blue and not assume people are just going to vote for you because, Obama and because your last name's Clinton.
Yeah, but see, that's an entitlement complex. But what I'm trying to say
is it's absolutely entitlement complex.
The people who don't find Hillary Clinton problematic, because let's be honest, there's a good number of people who voted for her. They were holding their nose. They knew what they were doing, and they may have had some cognitive dissonance. But it is what it is. But there's a subsection of the population who also have entitlement complexes, and for them, Hillary Clinton was only a boon, and they just can't understand a world in which she could not win. That world doesn't make sense to them. So now they've concocted an elaborate conspiracy theory, and it's not even elaborate. It's basically the plot to a movie that would come out in the 80s. I mean, basically plot. Well, whatever. Anyway, probably plot to a lot of movies.
Or early 90s. You know, this is almost the plot of Hackers.
This is almost a plot of Hackers. Except less hot Angelina Jolie when she was like, what, 19, 18? Zero short hair and Angelina Jolie. And but I've said before, some people are more willing to engage in elaborate conspiracy theories than they are to look at themselves, to turn that gaze upon themselves. Because, you know what? I am problematic. My behavior is problematic. My place in life is problematic. But that doesn't gel with their notion of themselves as a good person. If you think you're a good person and you vote for Hillary Clinton and you don't find her problematic, I would say that you might want to re-examine your own definition of good. If you want to vote for her because she's the lesser of two evils, I don't agree with that mentality, but fine, whatever. That's your right. But for Peter Dow to come out and say anyone who thought Clinton was flawed or unlikable or corrupt or blah blah blah, that was Russia's plan. It's like, no, that's just reality.
I agree. Russia. Let's just be real, right? Putin's another white European person. He wasn't going to the hood. I mean, let's just be real. Like, this is what drives me so nuts. And it's like as I said, that's why I make all the jokes about the mind control. Because when you look at places, when you look at people, when you look at the numbers, like if they were honestly listening and if they actually did honest polling, right, instead of that polling that they were doing that was sugar-coated and rosy and told them everything was fine. See, this is the problem. You have people who are around you who just tell you what you want to hear all the time, and everybody lives in their own damn bubble. They were all in a silo together and didn't look at the real, because anytime there was a poll that came out that showed that he either had a slight lead or they were tied or they were in, a statistical tie. Oh, that doesn't mean anything because blah, 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 and the Obama coalition and blah, blah, blah. But here's, like you said about the entitlement complex, they assume that voters, people who voted and worked for Obama, would just naturally do the same for her. She outspent Obama in terms of advertising. Most of it was negative, deriding Donald Trump, and it did not pay. Many people, even just average people who weren't even into all this stuff, kept saying, I need something more than defeat Trump bad. And that even now, right, this sounds crazy. And people are like, well, don't you think it's serious that Russia, interfered and hacked our election? See, because this language starts getting really convoluted. Our election was not hacked. If you even read the WikiLeaks, and there was like one or two pieces that even tried to say the WikiLeaks weren't even that bad. How it became bad and why it was a story is because they kept trying to lie about it. Like, okay, it's a problem. It needs to be dealt with. But let's just be clear. You're a person running a very important function in our society, allegedly, right? And you got dummies like whoever the hell works for Podesta clicking on links in Google that end up being phishing leaks that somehow get access to all your stuff. He's the same dummy who left his PDA or BlackBerry in a damn cab, not once, but twice, unlocked with no passwords. So it's not like this is really this. I mean, some of this stuff is so juvenile and so amateur. I wonder if it really required the level of sophistication that these international cyber hackers are really used to. Because you know what really took some sophistication? Hacking the records of federal workers last year. Now that was a major cyber attack, literally against the United States, literally against our government. They stole, including mine, personal information, social security numbers, fingerprints, all types of stuff. I did not see. There was a bunch of mumbling and fumbling. We got some second-rate whack-ass lifeguard or whatever the hell to protect ourselves, which hasn't worked anyway. And there was no question about, oh, we're going to war and oh this and oh that. But because Hillary Clinton's campaign team got hacked, because they're so great with cybersecurity, right? I mean, and they also want us to believe that her campaign team got hacked, but her private impermissible server, which also had whack-ass security, nobody touched that at all. I don't buy it. I don't buy it at all. And the problem is that we need to have that conversation, but this conversation that's happening, that this is why she lost, is retarded. I know that's probably not a good word. Apologies, but hey, I'm out of words right now.
It's wagging the dog is what it is. It's prestidigitation. Yeah, that's not a good move, but that's what it is. It's look over here at this thing and don't concern yourself with what that thing exposed, because I don't think anyone is making the argument that whether they were leaks or hacks or whether a Podesta clicked on a phishing email for mail enhancement, whether or not that what he said was what has been exposed is not true. No one has said it's not true. The DNC leaks were true. So what it becomes is, again,
well, that's what that was how they tried to spin it. They spent so much time instead of just owning up. It's like it's not that big of a deal. This is personal. Blah blah blah. They tried to say it was fabricated, that it was this, that it was that it was all this other stuff. They deflected, and it made it worse than it had to be. Just like with her server to begin with, right? Because ultimately the server thing and all this other stuff. I know, some of y'all might get mad about this, but this really wasn't. I mean, it's huge, but it's not that huge. Like, and had she been honest about it, we wouldn't have even had all this investigation and stuff.
But again, this is part of a larger entitlement complex. They felt as though the information was. It's hard to a parallel. They felt as though giving people total disclosure, full disclosure of what's going on, is tantamount to fixing an election. And that mentality is problematic because theoretically in a democracy, in a democratic society where people are expected to make informed decisions, the more information the better about the candidates. That would be your position. That's what transparency is all about. But this is tantamount to saying, well, giving out information, factual information, is the same thing as muddying the waters with scandals, or rather, you know what else was a complex scheme to fix an election? Watergate. That was complex. People had to go full Mission Impossible in that one. This was just like a bunch of people who were so privileged they felt that they would always be safe and allowed to do things that with no repercussions. And this is what, I mean, right. Honestly, this is when, I don't know if you've ever had to hold someone who has never been held accountable to account for something, but this is how they behave.